Hello. You find me in the manse garden, and I've carefully positioned the camera so that you can see what this is behind me, which is, I think you'll agree, a rather magnificent rose bush. I have no idea what variety of rose it is at all. It was here when we first arrived. There's another one over there which you can't see, which isn't quite so splendid as this one. But the point about both of these plants, both of these rose bushes, is that for several years they were, to all intents and purposes, dead. I mean, I'm not accusing my predecessors who lived in this house of any of them of neglect of duty, as it were, because I'm no gardener myself. In fact, that's one reason why I'm not turning the camera around and showing you the rest of the garden. But I came across these roses again this summer because last summer someone who knows a lot more about plants than I do came into our garden and saw this ostensibly dead rose bush, which up until then had rarely, if ever, properly bloomed. You'd get the occasional bud would turn up and give you this little frisson of hope, and then it would die off. I was actually asking him, I said, would you dig the things up for me, because they're useless. I'd quite like to try some other form of experiment in terms of plants and gardens. And he said, no, I think you find we can do something about this. How are you going to do that? I said. He said, well, come back in half an hour, I'll show you. And I came back in half an hour, made him a cup of tea, brought it out, as I usually did. And he basically chopped it to shreds. The branches mostly were gone. And it looked like, well, he basically committed some kind of horticultural murder. But he assured me, no. He said, I've been very careful about where I've cut it back, but I've cut it back, I've pruned it severely, is the way he put it. Okay, but not chaotically. He'd taken his secateurs to the rose, but calculatedly, you might say. We'll have a look at it again next year, he said, which is this summer. Well, look at it now. His confidence fully vindicated. My cynicism totally decimated. I couldn't see how those roses, that rose bush, was ever going to, well, certainly even survive the murderous attack by the gardener, let alone do more than survive, but thrive. It's covered with blooms now. My wife suggested we cut a few and take them indoors, but I somehow thought that would be somewhat churlish. It struggled so much to grow out here in the bright sunshine and the sheltered part of this garden, and we're just going to cut its head off and take it indoors. No, we'll leave it where it is and look at it in wonder and gaze at it in awe for what we didn't know, or I didn't know, it could do. Now, there'll be gardeners amongst you all who will be saying, well, come on, Alan, big deal, well done. You've finally sussed what many of us could have told you within 5 minutes. What that gardener, a friend of yours that I did last year, is neither miraculous nor is it unexpected if you have the courage to take up the secateurs and do what you should do. I sometimes wonder whether coronavirus, whether we love it or loathe it, and trust me, I loathe it, and it fills me full of fear as I am sat here in lockdown, and as I listen to the way so much of our society is reacting to it. But nonetheless, it makes me wonder sometimes whether coronavirus might be the inadvertent secateurs that have been applied not only to our society in general, but to the church in particular. Some of us have spent our entire ministry, and I include myself in this, maybe even came into the church determined to wield the secateurs, recognising that the vast unwieldy structure of the church needed pruning, cutting back severely. And maybe we spent our ministry, many of us have spent our ministry desperately trying to persuade other members of the church that the only way that new blooms are going to happen, that the church is going to grow, is if we have the courage to take into our hands the secateurs, if we identify those once productive areas of church work which no longer produce anything other than bitterness and sorrow, can finally be jettisoned. If we can finally look at places where we gather and recognise that we only gather there now because we always have, and actually they're in the wrong place and amongst the wrong people. I wonder whether we can press the reset button, to change the metaphor slightly, whether we can actually do the pruning now that we recognise that forcing its way through in this time, even in the unpruned plant of the church, there are blossoms, there are blooms, there are signs of hope actually in how we've been dealing with this crisis. And those signs of hope are not only what we cling to, they're the things from which we make the tools with which we prune the tree, the bush, in hope that in summers to come we may see the fruit or the blooms. Now actually it may be, and this is not meant to be said in any sense gloomily, but just as a recognition that tempers definitely fugites. I've discovered that to my cost. We may have to recognise that we won't see, some of us, maybe most of us, the blooms that we are encouraging to come by our courage to prune. It may be that the trees we plant today, well, almost certainly, the trees we plant today, the saplings we plant, we will not live to sit in the shade of, which is very bad grammar when I think about it, but I think you know what I'm saying. That doesn't, however, absolve us from the need, the duty, the responsibility, however painful it might be, to prune, to plant, to grow, to hope, and to expect in God's good time the plant that He lovingly placed in this place to rediscover its capacity to enhance the life of the world and bring salvation to those who are seeking the truth, seeking the knowledge of God that we have failed to provide once more amongst the people of God. Stay safe and God bless you.